Welcome, friend, to this quiet space where the noise of the modern world fades and the echoes of the past gently take its place. I'm so glad you're here, settling in for a story. Before we journey back to a time of stone castles and flickering candlelight, I'd love to hear where you're re-listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's a wonderful thought, all of us connected by a shared curiosity, scattered across the globe but listening together in the stillness. I always love seeing how far our community of night owls stretches. If you enjoy this kind of calm, immersive storytelling to help you unwind and drift off, please consider subscribing for more. Tonight, we're not visiting the grand halls of kings or the glorious fields of chivalrous battle. Instead, we're stepping into the shadows, into the quiet, often brutal, and almost entirely unwritten lives of the women who held the medieval world together with calloused hands and resilient hearts. Theirs was a life dictated by duty, defined by limitations, and endured with a strength we can scarcely imagine. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Let us begin not with a queen or a noble lady, but with a young woman named Elspeth, whose world is no larger than the small damp patch of earth. Her family calls home in the year of our Lord 1325. The first thing you would notice about Elspeth is not her appearance, but the smell that clings to her like a second skin, a pungent symphony of wood smoke, sweat, damp wool, and the faint, ever-present aroma of livestock. Her home is a single-room wattle-landau hut, its floor made of packed earth that turns to mud in the rain and dust in the sun. There are no windows, only small openings that let in slivers of light and drafts of frigid air. Privacy as a concept is foreign as silk. She shares this space with her parents, two younger siblings, and occasionally a sickly sheep brought inside for warmth during the harsh winter. Her bed, a straw-filled mattress on the floor, is a lively ecosystem of fleas, lice, and other uninvited guests. Life for Elspeth, like for the vast majority of medieval women, is a cycle dictated not by choice, but by the relentless turning of the seasons and the unwavering authority of the church and her husband. From the moment she could walk, her life has been one of labor. As a child, she was not sent to school education, was a luxury reserved for noble boys and a handful of nuns, but to the fields. She learned to scare crows from the barley, to pull weeds until her small hands were raw, and to carry buckets of water from the village well that were almost as heavy as she was. Now at 16, she is considered a woman, though her body is wiry and small from a diet that consists almost entirely of pottage. Bland, never-ending stew of grains and root vegetables, and coarse dark bread that could double as a whetstone. Meat is a rare, almost mythical treat tasted only a few times a year on major feast days. Her drink of choice from morning till night is small beer, a week, alcohol ale that is far safer to drink than the local stream water, which is a murky cocktail of animal waste and human refuse. Her world is governed by a rigid social and spiritual hierarchy. God is in heaven, the king is on his throne, the Lord is in his manor, and her husband or father, if she is not yet married, is the undisputed master of her small world. The church teaches that women are the daughters of Eve, inherently weaker, more susceptible to sin, and destined for a life of submission and suffering. This is not just theology, it is law. Woman is legally her husband's property. He is permitted, even encouraged, to discipline her for perceived transgressions. A vague term that could cover anything from burning the porridge to speaking out of turn. Elspeth has seen the bruises on her mother's arms and knows that her own future holds the same quiet endurance. Her marriage will not be a matter of love, but of arrangement. It will be a transaction between her father and her future husband. A negotiation involving a small dowry, perhaps a pig or a few chickens, to secure an alliance that benefits the men in her life. The greatest terror and the greatest expectation of her life is childbirth. In a world without sterile instruments, antibiotics, or understanding of germs, bringing a child into the world is a life or death gamble. The village midwife, a woman like her mother, will assist with knowledge passed down through generations, a mixture of herbal remedies, practical experience, and raw superstition. But if complications arise, there is little to be done but pray. A significant number of women do not survive the experience, succumbing to infection or blood loss. For those who do, the cycle of pregnancy and birth will repeat, relentlessly until their bodies are worn out or they reach the ancient age of 40. Elspeth knows this because she has seen it. She has watched women in her village grow old before their time, their bodies stooped from endless work and the physical toll of bearing a dozen children, only to see half of them perish before their 5th birthday from disease or malnutrition. This is the grim reality that lies beneath the romanticized veneer of medieval life. It is a world where a woman's worth is measured by her ability to work, obey, and reproduce. She has no legal voice, no political power, and precious little control over her own body or destiny. Her name will not be recorded in any chronicle. Her struggles will not be sung by any troubadour. She is one of the silent millions, the invisible scaffolding that supports the grand structure of medieval society. Her life is a testament not to grand adventures or heroic deeds, but to the profound, quiet, and often brutal resilience required simply to endure. And for Elspeth, as the morning bell tolls, another day of this endurance has just begun. As the first slivers of gray light penetrate the smoky haze of the hut, Elspeth's day of labor begins in earnest. There is no gentle awakening, no quiet moment of contemplation. The world demands work, and it demands it now. Her first task, before even a morsel of the gritty pottage passes her lips, is to tend to the fire. The hearth, a simple clay-lined pit in the center of the hut's dirt floor, is the heart of their small world. It provides the only source of heat, the only means of cooking, and of flickering inadequate light against the oppressive darkness. But it is a hungry and temperamental god. Elspeth's small hands, already calloused and rough, coax the embers from last night back to life, feeding them precious twigs and dried dung. Wood is a luxury, carefully rationed, as much of the surrounding forest belongs to the lord of the manor. Taking wood without permission, even a fallen branch, is considered poaching, a crime punishable by a fine they could never pay, or worse, a public flogging. The smoke from the fire has no proper chimney to escape through. It simply curls upwards, filling the small space with a constant stinging haze that irritates the eyes and catches in the back of the throat before eventually finding its way out of a small hole in the thatched roof. This perpetual smoke exposure is a slow poison. And the rattling cough that plagues her father in the winter is a grim forecast of her own future. Once the fire is stable, her attention turns to the animals. The family's goat and 2 chickens, who share their living space, must be ushered outside. Their waste, mingled with the straw and rushes covering the floor, adds another layer to the hut's complex and deeply unpleasant aroma. This intimate proximity to livestock is a matter of survival. Animals are too valuable to be left outside at night, vulnerable to predators or thieves, and their body heat provides a small but crucial amount of warmth. But it also means the hut is a breeding ground for disease. Fleas are a constant companion, and the general lack of sanitation is a daily, unavoidable reality. Elspeth doesn't think of it in terms of hygiene, a concept that does not exist in her world. It is simply the way things are. She then takes the wooden bucket that serves as their communal chamber pot and carries it outside. With a practiced motion, she empties its contents into the small, muddy track that passes for a street, perhaps shouting a cursory warning if she remembers. The village streets are open sewers, a soupy mixture of human waste, animal droppings, and discarded scraps. In the rain, they become rivers of filth. In the summer, they bake into a crust that releases a foul stench under the hot sun. Her next task is fetching water from the village well. This is a journey she makes several times a day, balancing 2 heavy wooden buckets on a yoke across her narrow shoulders. The well is the village's social hub, a place where women gather and exchange news, but the water itself is a gamble. Though it is drawn from deep within the earth, it is often contaminated, seeping with the filth from the surrounding ground. Outbreaks of dysentery, or the bloody flux as they call it, are common, often wiping out the youngest and oldest members of the community. Elspeth drinks it because there is no alternative, trusting to luck and a strong constitution. The weight of the water strains her back, and by the end of the day, a dull ache will have settled deep in her spine. A pain so familiar, it has become part of her existence. It is the same pain she sees etched on her mother's face and in the stooped shoulders of every woman in the village. It is the price of water, the price of life. Back in the hut, the day's food preparation begins. There's no pantry, no neat storage. Small sack of barley, a few onions, and perhaps a shriveled turnip are all they have. The pottage pot hangs over the fire, a perpetual stew that is never fully emptied. New ingredients are simply added to what remains from the day before, creating a bland, starchy gruel that sustains but never satisfies. Her mother might add some foraged herbs for flavor nettles in the spring. Wild garlic if she is lucky, but the taste is overwhelmingly one of grain and smoke. Elspeth's role in this is to grind the barley using a quern, two heavy circular stones that she turns by hand. The work is exhausting, a monotonous circular motion that makes her arms and shoulders burn. The resulting flour is coarse and gritty, and the bread they bake from it is dense and hard, a food to be gnawed rather than chewed. This is the diet that will fuel a day of back-breaking labor in the fields, a diet lacking in essential nutrients which leads to stunted, growth-weakened immune systems and teeth that begin to rot by the time a woman is in her 20s. The life of a peasant woman is an endless cycle of chores, each one demanding physical strength and an uncomplaining spirit. After the morning meal, she will join her family in the fields, her life governed by the agricultural calendar that has remained unchanged for centuries. The fields that surround Elspeth's village are not idyllic, rolling green pastures. They are a battleground where humanity wages a relentless war against nature, armed with little more than wood, iron, and sinew. As Elspeth steps out of the smoky confines of her hut, the vast, open expanse of the manor's land stretches before her. This land does not belong to her family. They are serfs, bound to this soil by a complex web of feudal obligations that is as inescapable as the changing of the seasons. They work the land, and in return for the Lord's protection of vague and rarely tested promise, they owe him the majority of their labor, their crops, and their loyalty. Their lives are not their own. They are assets, as much a part of the manor's inventory as the oxen or the mill. The work is divided by the seasons, a rhythm that has governed life here for generations. In the spring, it is the back-breaking task of plowing and sowing. In the summer, the endless, tedious work of weeding. And in the late summer and autumn, the frantic, exhausting rush of the harvest. Today, under the pale sun of an English spring, is a day for plowing. The family's small plot of land, which they are allowed to cultivate for their own subsistence, must be prepared. But first their labor is owed to the Lord's domain, the vast fields whose entire yield belongs to the manor. Elspeth joins her father, mother, and other villagers. Walking towards the great fields where the Lord's reeve, a man chosen from among the peasants to oversee the work is already waiting. The reeve, Thomas, is a hard man because the Lord demands it. His own position depends on his ability to extract the maximum amount of work from his neighbors. There is no camaraderie here, only a tense, grudging obedience. The main tool for this task is the heavy plow, a revolutionary piece of technology in its time, but a monster to operate. It is a cumbersome contraption of wood and iron pulled by a team of weary oxen. Guiding it is a man's job, a task requiring immense physical strength to keep the plowshare cutting a straight furrow in the dense rocky soil. Elspeth's role, like that of the other women and children, is to follow behind the plow. Her job is to break up the larger clumps of earth with a crude wooden mallet or her bare hands, and to clear the furrow of stones. It is monotonous, soul-crushing work. She spends hours bent over, her back screaming in protest, her eyes scanning the dark, damp earth. Her fingers, already chapped and sore from her morning chores, become raw and bloody from the sharp edges of the stones. There is no rest, save for a brief midday pause for a drink of ale and another piece of hard, gritty bread. The reeve watches them like a hawk, his voice sharp and unforgiving if he sees anyone slowing their pace. A moment of distraction could be dangerous. A misplaced foot could be caught under the heavy plow, or a careless hand could be struck by a stone thrown by the person working beside her. Injuries are common, and there is no medicine beyond a poultice of herbs and a prayer. An infected wound, a common consequence in this world of filth, could mean a slow and agonizing death. The sounds of the field are a symphony of drudgery, the rhythmic creak of the plow wooden frame the strained. Lowing of the oxen, the sharp crack of the plowman's whip, the dull thud of mallets on earth, and the constant weary breathing of the workers. Conversation is sparse. There is no energy for idle chatter. The focus is on the task at hand, on enduring the hours until the sun begins to dip towards the horizon. The work instills a deep, intimate knowledge of the land. Elspeth can tell by the color and texture of the soil which parts of the field will yield a good crop and which are barren. She recognizes the stubborn roots of the weeds that will choke their barley if not diligently removed. This is a knowledge born not of books, but of sweat and pain, a wisdom of the earth that is both a comfort and a curse. For the women, the labor does not end when they leave the fields. As the men guide the oxen back to the common pasture, Elspeth and her mother face another set of tasks. They must gather firewood for the evening meal, their arms aching as they carry bundles of sticks back to the hut. They must tend to the small vegetable patch behind their dwelling, a precious source of supplementary food that requires constant attention. They must mend the family's single set of woolen garments, darning holes and patching tears by the fading light. There is also the spinning. Every woman and girl is expected to contribute to the production of thread. Using a simple drop spindle, a weighted stick that she twists by hand, Elspeth spends her evenings spinning raw wool into yarn. It is a skill learned in early childhood, a seemingly gentle task that, after a full day of fieldwork, becomes another form of physical torment. Her fingers cramp, her neck aches from hunching over, yet the spindle must keep turning. The Lord's wife demands a certain quota of yarn from each family, and failure to meet it will result in punishment. Life for a medieval peasant woman is a relentless, overlapping series of labors, a reality that offers no distinction between work and home, no concept of leisure. Her body is a tool, first for her father, then for her husband, and always for the lord of the manor. Her endurance is not celebrated, it is simply expected. In the world Elspeth inhabits, the concepts of rights and justice are luxuries as unattainable as a silk gown. For a woman, her legal identity is not her own. It is a reflection of the man who controls her. Before marriage, she is her father's daughter, subject to his will and authority. After marriage, she seamlessly transitions into being her husband's wife, her legal existence absorbed into his under a doctrine known as coverture. This isn't just a social custom. It is the law of the land, reinforced by the church and the manor court. A woman cannot own property in her own name. She cannot sign a contract. She cannot sue or be sued, and she cannot testify in court against her husband. She is in the cold, unfeeling language of the law, a femme covert, a covered woman, perpetually under the legal shadow of a male guardian. This legal invisibility is the bedrock of her existence, a reality that shapes every interaction and limits every ambition. Elspeth sees this principle in action every day. When a dispute arises over a straying pig or a contested boundary between plots of land, it is the men who gather to argue their case before the reeve or at the manor court. The women stand silently in the background, their opinions neither sought nor valued. Their knowledge of the matter, often more intimate and detailed than their husbands', is irrelevant. The world of law and governance is a male domain, and a woman's voice has no place in it. The only time a woman might find herself at the center of a legal proceeding is as the subject of the dispute itself, an accusation of witchcraft, adultery, or scolding. In these instances, she is not a participant in her own defense, but an object to be judged. Her fate decided by a group of men who view her through a lens of suspicion and scripture. The institution of marriage, far from being a partnership, is the legal mechanism that formalizes her subservience. Elspeth's impending marriage to a young man named William from a neighboring village is a stark illustration of this reality. She has met William only once, a brief, awkward encounter overseen by both sets of parents. The match was arranged by her father not for love or compatibility, but for practical advantage. William's family has a slightly better plot of land and owns 2 oxen, a considerable step up. In exchange for this alliance, Elspeth's father will provide a small dowry, their family's only goat and a few hand-spun lengths of woolen cloth. Elspeth herself has no say in the matter. To refuse the match would be an act of unthinkable defiance, a rebellion against her father's authority that would bring shame and punishment upon her. She will leave the only home she has ever known, move to a new village where she knows no one, and place herself under the complete legal and physical control of a man who is a virtual stranger. Once married, William will become her lord and master in the most literal sense. He will have the legal right to her labor any property she might inherit, and her body. The concept of marital rape does not exist. A wife's consent is assumed to be a permanent condition of the marriage contract. The church teaches that it is her sacred duty to submit to her husband's desires and to produce heirs, preferably sons, to carry on his family name. Domestic violence is not only common but legally sanctioned. A husband is permitted to use reasonable chastisement to correct his wife's behavior. The definition of reasonable is, of course, left to the husband's discretion. Elspeth has seen the results of this chastisement on the faces of women in her village: a split lip, bruised eye, borne in silence because there is no authority to appeal to. The community may whisper, but the law is clear. A man's home is his castle. What happens within its walls is his business alone. There are, however, rare exceptions and loopholes in this oppressive system. A widow, for instance, might find herself in a position of surprising autonomy. Upon her husband's death, if she has no sons of legal age, a woman could inherit control of his land and property at least until she remarries. This widow's dower grants her a legal standing that most women will never experience. She can manage her own affairs, make contracts, and even appear in the manor court. Some widows, particularly those of advanced age, skillfully navigate this newfound independence, becoming respected and even powerful figures within their communities. They are the exception that proves the rule. Their brief moment of legal identity, a stark contrast to the lifelong subservience of their married sisters. But this freedom is precarious. A widow is often under immense pressure to remarry, to place herself once again under the protection and control of a man. To remain single is to be vulnerable, an anomaly in a world built on patriarchal family units. For Elspeth, the prospect of widowhood is a distant and abstract thought. Her immediate future is defined by the rigid and unforgiving structure of marriage. Her life will be a mirror of her mother's, a relentless cycle of pregnancy, childbirth, and labor, all under the watchful eye of a husband whose authority is absolute and unquestionable. Her identity will be subsumed into his, her name forgotten, her contributions unrecorded. This is the grim legal reality for the vast majority of women in medieval Europe, a system designed to ensure their silence, their submission, and their service to the patriarchal order that governs their world. It is a life without choice, without voice, and without recourse. For a medieval woman like Elspeth, the transition from girlhood to womanhood is marked by two profound and terrifying events: her wedding night and the birth of her first child. Of the two, childbirth is by far the most perilous. It is a recurring battle fought not on a field of honor with swords and banners, but on a sweat-soaked straw mattress in the dark confines of a smoky hut. It is a war waged against pain, infection, and death itself, and it is a war that a shocking number of women do not survive. The church calls it Eve's curse, the biblical punishment for original sin, a holy suffering that a woman must endure to bring new life into the world. But for the women themselves, it is simply a brutal biological reality, the most dangerous journey they will ever undertake. Elspeth has seen it firsthand. She has been present at the births of her younger siblings, has heard the guttural screams that seem to tear the very air apart, has seen the blood and the fear in her own mother's eyes. She knows what awaits her. When a woman's time comes, the room is cleared of all men. Childbirth is an exclusively female domain, a secret and sacred ritual presided over by the village midwife and a handful of experienced mothers. The midwife is not a trained medical professional in any modern sense. She's a woman like Elspeth's mother, whose knowledge is a tapestry woven from practical experience, herbal lore, and a thick thread of superstition. She has no access to sterile instruments, no understanding of germ theory, and no ability to perform a cesarean section or handle severe complications. Her tools are her hands, a few clean rags if the family is fortunate, and a collection of prayers and charms meant to appease the saints and ward off the demons that are believed to hover around every birth, eager to snatch the soul of the mother or the newborn. The process itself is a grim endurance test. Labor can last for days, a relentless marathon of agonizing contractions that leaves a woman utterly exhausted and depleted. The midwife offers what comfort she can: a sip of ale, poultice of herbs to rub on the back, and endless words of encouragement and prayer. The risks are astronomical by modern standards. A baby in the breech position, a hemorrhage that will not stop, a fever that signals the onset of puerperal sepsis, or childbed fever. All of these are likely death sentences. Without the ability to intervene surgically or fight infection with antibiotics, the midwife can only watch and wait, her role reduced to that of a helpless witness. The mortality rate for both mother and child is staggering. Historians estimate that as many as 1 in 3 women might die from complications related to childbirth over the course of their reproductive lives. And for the infants, the first month of life is the most dangerous. Perhaps a quarter of all babies born will not survive to see their first birthday, succumbing to disease, malnutrition, or the harsh conditions of their environment. Elspeth carries this knowledge within her, a cold knot of fear in the pit of her stomach. She has seen the small, unmarked graves in the corner of the churchyard, the final resting places of infants who lived only a few days or weeks. Every family in the village has such graves, silent testaments to the fragility of life. Superstition infuses every aspect of the birthing process. It is believed that a difficult labor can be eased by untying all the knots in the house and ropes. In clothing, in hair to symbolically untie the womb. Placing an axe under the birthing bed is thought to cut the pain. Prayers are offered to Saint Margaret, the patron saint of childbirth, whose legend tells of her being swallowed by a dragon and emerging unharmed. A powerful metaphor for a successful birth. These beliefs, while offering psychological comfort, do nothing to alter the brutal physical realities of the ordeal. When the child is finally born, the danger is far from over. The cutting of the umbilical cord with an unsterilized knife presents a massive risk of infection for the newborn. Tetanus, or the 7-day sickness, is a common and fatal result. Once the ordeal is over, and assuming both mother and child have survived, the woman's life enters a new phase of relentless labor. She is now a mother, a role that brings with it a host of new and demanding responsibilities. She will nurse her child, as animal milk is often scarce and unsafe. She will carry the infant with her to the fields, strapping it to her back as she continues her back-breaking work. There is no concept of maternity leave, no period of rest and recovery. The demands of survival are too great. A woman is expected to be back on her feet and contributing to the family's labor within days of giving birth, her body still weak and torn from the experience. This is the unwritten, unspoken reality of womanhood that awaits Elspeth. It is a future defined by a cycle of pain, risk, and unending work. Her body will be a vessel for new life, but that role comes at a terrible cost to her own health and well-being. She, like her mother before her, will likely be old and worn out by the age of 30. Her youth sacrificed at the altar of procreation and labor. For Elspeth and the women of her time, life is lived in a state of constant low-grade physical misery. The grand plagues and sweeping famines are the dramatic events that make it into historical chronicles. But the daily reality is a more intimate and grinding war against a host of lesser ailments, any one of which could prove fatal in a world devoid of modern medical understanding. Health is not a state to be maintained, but a fleeting blessing. An illness is not a biological event, but a sign of divine displeasure or an imbalance in the body's mysterious humors. The very environment is a relentless assault on the body. The lack of sanitation means that Elspeth is in constant contact with filth. The water she drinks, the dirt floor she sleeps on, the very air she breathes all are teeming with invisible threats. A small cut from a sharp stone in the field or a nick from a paring knife is not a minor inconvenience. It is a potential death sentence. Without antiseptics or antibiotics, infection is a constant and often victorious foe. She has seen strong men laid low by a festering wound that turned their limb black with gangrene, their only cure being a horrific, unanesthetized amputation by the local barber surgeon, an ordeal few survived. The medieval understanding of medicine is based not on science, but on a theory inherited from the ancient Greeks, the 4 humors. It is believed that the human body contains 4 essential fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, that good health depends on these humors being in perfect balance. Every illness, from a common cold to a life-threatening fever, is attributed to an excess or deficiency of one of these fluids. The treatments, therefore, are designed not to fight pathogens, but to restore this delicate equilibrium. If a person has a fever, It is assumed they have an excess of hot, moist blood. The logical cure: bloodletting. Elspeth has witnessed this terrifying procedure, performed by the same man who cuts hair and pulls teeth. He will open a vein with a phleem or apply leeches to drain the excess blood, leaving the patient weaker and even more vulnerable to the actual cause of their illness. For women, this humoral theory has specific and often cruel applications. Menstruation is seen as the body's natural way of expelling an excess of blood, but it also reinforces the belief that women are inherently unbalanced and unstable creatures. A woman's health is a mysterious and volatile thing. Her womb a source of strange vapors and afflictions that can affect her mind as well as her body. The concept of women's troubles covers a vast and vague array of ailments. Painful periods, difficulties with pregnancy, and menopause are all viewed through a lens of suspicion and ignorance. The cures are often bizarre and ineffective, ranging from herbal concoctions of dubious efficacy to prayers and the wearing of protective amulets. For a condition like a prolapsed uterus, common and agonizing result of multiple difficult childbirths, there is no cure, only a life of chronic pain and discomfort. Mental illness, what they might call melancholy or madness, is seen as a spiritual failing, or worse, a sign of demonic possession. A woman suffering from what we would now diagnose as postpartum depression might be subjected to exorcisms, public shaming, or simply be locked away, her suffering dismissed as a manifestation of her weak and sinful nature. Elspeth's own health is a precarious thing. Her diet, lacking in essential vitamins, leaves her perpetually anemic and susceptible to illness. Her teeth, like those of most peasants, are in a state of steady decay, and the constant throbbing pain of a toothache is a familiar companion. There is no dentist to fill the cavity. The only solution for a rotten tooth is extraction. A brutal procedure performed without anesthetic by the village blacksmith or barber surgeon, using a terrifying pair of iron pliers. The physical toll of her labor is cumulative and unforgiving. The repetitive motions of weeding, spinning, and grinding grain lead to chronic pain in her back, shoulders, and hands. By the time she reaches her 20s, her body will already feel old and worn, her joints creaking with a weariness that goes beyond simple fatigue. She sees this future in the stooped posture and gnarled hands of her mother and the other women of the village. It is an accepted, inevitable part of a woman's life. In this world, there is no concept of preventative care or public health. Disease is an act of God, a punishment for sin or simply bad luck. When illness strikes the village, as it often does, the community's only defenses are prayer and quarantine. The sick are often left to fend for themselves, their neighbors, and even their own families keeping their distance for fear of catching the affliction. The line between caring for the ill and protecting oneself is a thin and often cruel one. Elspeth's life, and the lives of all those around her, are lived with an intimate and constant awareness of their own fragility. Death is not a distant, sanitized event, but a frequent and visible visitor to the village. It is this ever-present reality that gives their faith its desperate intensity. In their moments of joy, their precious fleeting beauty. The church stands at the absolute center of Elspeth's world, a silent stone sentinel in a landscape of wood and mud. Its bell tolls the hours, marking the rhythm of her days, calling her to prayer, to feast days, and to funerals. It is a source of profound comfort, the only promise of a better world beyond this one of suffering. But it is also a source of immense and inescapable authority, a power that shapes her identity, dictates her morality, and reinforces her subordinate place in the grand order of things. Oh, for a medieval woman, the church is both a sanctuary and a cage, its doctrines woven into the very fabric of her being from the moment of her baptism. The foundation of this teaching is simple and damning. She is a daughter of Eve. From the pulpit, the village priest, Father John, preaches the story of the fall of man. It is a story Elspeth knows by heart, a story where the fate of all humanity pivots on the weakness of a single woman. Eve, created from Adam's rib, and therefore secondary to him, was tempted by the serpent, disobeyed God, and led Adam into sin. As a consequence, all women are heirs to her guilt, her frailty, and her punishment. This theological premise is not an abstract concept. It has profound and practical consequences. It justifies the patriarchal structure of medieval society, providing a divine mandate for the submission of women to men. Father John's sermons, delivered in booming Latin that Elspeth barely understands, but whose tone of damnation is unmistakable, reinforce this message relentlessly. A woman's purpose is to be a dutiful daughter, a submissive wife, and a fertile mother. Her spiritual salvation lies in her obedience, her silence, and her suffering. The pain of childbirth, he explains, is her specific penance for Eve's transgression, a holy agony that she must bear with pious resignation. This teaching is a powerful tool of social control, instilling in Elspeth a deep-seated sense of her own inherent inferiority and sinfulness. She is taught to fear her own body, its desires a potential gateway to damnation. She is taught to distrust her own thoughts, her intellect considered weaker and more susceptible to deception than a man's. Yet, the Church also offers a powerful counter-narrative in the figure of the Virgin Mary. Mary, the Mother of God, is the ultimate feminine ideal, pure, chaste, and utterly submissive to the divine will. She is the second Eve, whose obedience redeems the disobedience of the first. For Elspeth and the women of her village, Mary is a source of immense comfort and a powerful intercessor. They pray to her with a fervor and intimacy they might not feel for the more remote and judgmental male figures of the Trinity. They see in her a reflection of their own maternal roles, Divine Mother who understands their specific sorrows and struggles. The cult of the Virgin is a vital part of their spiritual lives, a space within the patriarchal structure of the Church where the feminine is venerated.
Ow.
This creates a profound and often confusing paradox. A woman is simultaneously a sinful daughter of Eve and a potential imitator of the Blessed Virgin. She is both the source of humanity's fall and the vessel for its salvation. This dual identity, the sinner and the saint, is a constant source of psychological tension, tightrope that every medieval woman must walk. The Church's control extends to the most intimate aspects of her life. It dictates the laws of marriage, forbids divorce, and condemns contraception as a mortal sin. A woman's reproductive life is not her own. It is a duty to God and to her husband, a means of populating the world with Christian souls. The rhythms of her life are also governed by the liturgical calendar. The year is a cycle of fasts and feasts, of penitence and celebration. For Elspeth, feast days are a welcome respite from the monotony of her diet and labor. On Christmas or Easter, the lord of the manor might provide a special meal for his serfs, and there will be ale, dancing, and a brief, precious moment of communal joy. But these feasts are followed by long periods of fasting, like the 40 days of Lent. When the Church forbids the consumption of meat and dairy, for a family already living on the brink of malnutrition, these fasts are a period of severe hardship, a holy duty that is also a physical torment. But to complain would be to question the wisdom of the Church, an act of impiety that could have social as well as spiritual consequences. In Elspeth's world, the community watches, and a reputation for piety is as valuable as a good harvest. She endures the hunger, believing that her suffering on earth will earn her a place in heaven, a promise that is the only real hope in her grim existence. Life in Elspeth's village is intensely communal, a fact dictated by the harsh necessities of survival. The romantic notion of bucolic pastoral bliss is a fantasy. In reality, this is a life lived under constant, suffocating scrutiny. The houses are clustered so closely together that a whispered argument in one hut is public knowledge by morning. Every action, every deviation from the norm, is observed, catalogued, and judged by the collective eyes of the village. This lack of privacy is both a support system and a prison. On one hand, the community provides a crucial safety net. When a family's ox dies or their roof collapses, it is the neighbors who will come to help, not out of pure altruism, but from a pragmatic understanding that their own survival depends on the well-being of the whole. A shared sense of fate binds them together in a fragile, often resentful solidarity. On the other hand, this same communal gaze enforces a rigid conformity. A woman who is too clever, too outspoken, or too different risks being labeled a scold, a shrew, or far worse, a witch. For women, the primary social sphere is the world of other women. While the men gather at the alehouse or discuss manor business, The women's lives are intertwined through their shared labor. They fetch water together at the well, wash clothes on the stones of the stream, gather in small groups to spin wool in the evenings. These are the spaces where information is exchanged, where alliances are formed, and where reputations are made and destroyed. Gossip is not idle chatter. It is the village's primary source of news and a powerful tool for social regulation. A woman's reputation, her most valuable asset, is entirely in the hands of her female neighbors. Is she a good wife? Is she industrious? Is she pious? The answers to these questions, whispered over laundry and spinning wheels, will determine her standing in the community. A bad reputation can lead to social isolation, making it difficult to find help in times of need or to arrange good marriages for her children. Elspeth learns from a young age to be careful with her words, to keep her head down, and to avoid drawing unwanted attention. Leisure, as a concept, does not exist in Elspeth's vocabulary. Life is an unending sequence of tasks, and any moment not spent in productive labor is seen as a sign of idleness, a sin in the eyes of both God and the community. However, the grim monotony is punctuated by the church's calendar of feast days. These are the rare, precious moments of collective celebration and release. On saints' days or major holidays like Easter and Christmas, the lord of the manor is obligated to provide a feast for his serfs. For a day, the back-breaking labor ceases. The villagers will gather in the great hall of the manor, a space they normally only enter to pay their dues or receive judgment. They are served a meal that, to their deprived palates, tastes like a feast for the gods. Roasted meat, white bread made from wheat instead of coarse barley, and as much ale as they can drink. These occasions are a riot of noise and crude celebration. There is music, perhaps a fiddler or a piper, and clumsy, energetic dancing. For a few brief hours, the rigid social hierarchy seems to dissolve in a haze of food and drink. These feasts are the highlights of Elspeth's year, moments of vibrant, chaotic joy that stand in stark contrast to her daily existence. But even here, the social order is reinforced. The lord and his family sit at a high table, separate from and elevated above the common folk. They are served first with the best cuts of meat, while the peasants receive what is left. The feast is not a gift, but a calculated display of the lord's wealth and magnanimity, a way of reinforcing his power and the serf's dependence on his goodwill. Still for Elspeth, the taste of roasted pork and the freedom from labor, however temporary, is a potent tonic for her weary spirit. These celebrations are also a critical time for courtship and social bonding. Young men and women, normally segregated by their work, have a rare chance to interact under the watchful eyes of their elders. Shared glance, a clumsy dance, a whispered word, these are the small, significant moments that might lead to a future marriage arrangement. It is a world without romance in the modern sense, but not without its own forms of attraction and human connection, played out in the brief, sanctioned spaces of communal festivity. The day after the feast, however, the grim reality returns. The memory of the food and laughter fades, replaced by the familiar ache of labor and the gnawing of a half-empty stomach. The brief illusion of equality vanishes, and the vast, unbridgeable gulf between the lord in his castle and the serf in his hut is once again starkly apparent. While Elspeth's life in the village is a near-universal story for the vast majority of medieval women, it's not the only one. Beyond the endless cycle of sowing and reaping, there exist other paths, other lives that are whispered about at the village well or recounted by the rare traveler who passes through. These are the lives of townswomen, of domestic servants in great houses, and of nuns behind convent walls. To a girl like Elspeth, these alternatives might seem like a world away, a potential escape from the mud and toil of her existence. But each of these paths carries its own unique set of hardships, its own gilded cage, and its own forms of brutal reality. The medieval town, with its crowded, bustling streets and semblance of opportunity, represents the most significant alternative to rural life. A townswoman's life is not tied to the land, but to the rhythms of commerce and craft. If her father is an artisan baker, a weaver, a blacksmith, she will grow up learning the family trade. Unlike Elspeth, she may develop a specialized skill, her hands learning not the crude work of the fields, but the finer motions of kneading dough, working a loom, or keeping the accounts for her husband's workshop. The wife of a successful merchant or master craftsman might enjoy a standard of living that Elspeth could scarcely imagine. Her home might have 2 rooms instead of 1, wooden floors instead of packed earth, and perhaps even glass in a window. Her diet would be more varied, with more frequent access to meat, cheese, and a wider range of vegetables from the town market. However, this relative comfort comes at a price. A townswoman's life is still one of relentless work. Her days spent managing the household, supervising apprentices, and often working alongside her husband in the family business. The guilds that govern trade in the towns, while offering protection for their male members, provide few rights for women. A woman can typically only practice a trade through her husband or father. If her husband dies, a widow might be allowed to continue the business, but this right is often contingent on her not remarrying outside the guild. She remains trapped within the patriarchal structure, her economic survival dependent on her connection to a man. Furthermore, the town is a far more dangerous place than the village. Overcrowding and a complete lack of sanitation make disease a constant and deadly threat. The plague, when it comes, will scythe through the dense populations of the towns with terrifying speed. For a young, unmarried woman without the protection of a family, the town offers a more perilous kind of freedom. She might find work as a servant, an alewife, or a spinner. But her wages will be a fraction of a man's, and she will be in a state of constant vulnerability. Without the social safety net of the village community, she is an easy target for exploitation and abuse. For many such women, the line between respectable labor and the desperate, dangerous world of prostitution is perilously thin. Another path, one that might seem to offer an escape for a girl like Elspeth, is a life of domestic service in a noble household. To work in a great castle or manor house is to enter a world of unimaginable opulence, is to see fine clothes, to smell exotic spices, and to witness the elaborate rituals of aristocratic life up close. A young girl might start as a scullery maid, her days spent in the steamy, chaotic world of the kitchens, scrubbing pots and washing floors. If she is lucky and diligent, she might work her way up to become a chambermaid, tending to the private rooms of the lady of the house. Or a laundress, a physically demanding job that involves endless hours of heavy lifting and scrubbing with harsh lye soap. The life of a servant is one of constant grinding labor, from before dawn until late at night. There are no days off, no privacy, and no freedom. A servant is entirely at the mercy of their lord and lady, their well-being dependent on the temperament of their masters. A kind and just mistress might make life bearable, but a cruel or capricious one can make it a living hell. Physical punishment is common, and female servants are in a position of extreme sexual vulnerability. The lord, his sons, or his male guests often view the female staff as their property available for their pleasure. A servant girl who becomes pregnant is typically thrown out without a reference. Her life ruined, left to face a future of destitution and shame. Yet, despite the hardships, a life in service is often seen as preferable to the endless toil of the fields. It offers a roof over one's head, a guaranteed, if meager, meal, and a proximity to power that is both terrifying and alluring. For a very small number of women, primarily from noble or wealthy merchant families, there is one other alternative: the convent. A life dedicated to God, in theory, offers a woman the one thing that is otherwise completely denied to her: an escape from the relentless demands of marriage and childbirth. In the cloistered world of the nunnery, a woman might have the chance to learn to read and write, to study theology, and to exercise authority as an abbess or other official. Some convents become important centers of learning and culture, their libraries preserving ancient knowledge, their scriptoriums producing beautiful, illuminated manuscripts. For a woman with an intellectual or spiritual calling, the convent can be a genuine sanctuary, a place where she can develop her mind and spirit in a way that would be impossible in the secular world. However, the reality of convent life is often far from this ideal. Not all women who enter the convent do so by choice. Many are sent there by their families, who may be unable to provide a suitable dowry for marriage, or who may wish to dispose of a surplus daughter. For these unwilling nuns, the convent is not a sanctuary, but a prison, its vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience a life sentence of deprivation. Even for those who enter willingly, the life is one of strict discipline and hardship, constant cycle of prayer, fasting, and manual labor. The spiritual peace it offers is hard-won, a product of a relentless and often painful struggle against the desires of the flesh and the temptations of the world. These are the limited choices that lie beyond Elspeth's horizon. Each one, in its own way, is a reflection of the same fundamental reality. A woman's life is defined by service and submission, her path dictated by the men who control her world. In a life so relentlessly defined by hardship, it would be easy to assume that the world of a medieval woman like Elspeth was entirely devoid of beauty, comfort, or joy. Her existence, viewed through the lens of history, can appear as a monochrome landscape of suffering. Yet to imagine her life as nothing but a tapestry of gray is to misunderstand the profound resilience of the human spirit. Woven into the coarse fabric of her daily struggles are threads of simple, profound beauty and moments of genuine, if fleeting, contentment. These are not the grand joys of nobles or the celebrated triumphs of heroes. They are the small, almost invisible comforts that make a life of endurance not just possible, but in its own way, meaningful. These moments of grace are found not in escaping her reality, but in the very heart of it. The turning of the seasons, which dictates the rhythm of her labor, is also a source of constant, quiet wonder. After the long, bleak hunger of winter, the first signs of spring bring a hope so intense it is almost a physical ache. Elspeth feels it when she sees the first snowdrops pushing through the frozen earth in the churchyard, or the pale green buds appearing on the skeletal branches of the trees. The return of the birds, their songs filling the crisp morning air, is a promise that the world is waking from its long death. The longer days and the gentle warmth of the sun on her back, as she works in the fields, are a physical balm to her weary body. Summer brings its own sensory pleasures. The scent of freshly cut hay in the Lord's meadows, the taste of a wild strawberry small and intensely sweet found hidden in a hedgerow. The sight of a field of barley rippling like a golden sea in the wind, these are the small, perfect moments that are hers, alone stored in her memory like precious jewels. Even the back-breaking work of the harvest has its own grim satisfaction. The weight of a full sack of grain, the communal effort of bringing in the crop, and the knowledge that, for another year, they have wrested enough from the earth to survive. Community, for all its suffocating judgment, is also the source of her greatest comfort. The bonds forged with other women through shared labor are powerful and deep. At the well or by the stream, amidst the gossip and the complaints, there are also moments of laughter, shared advice, and quiet solidarity. They understand each other's lives in a way no man ever could. They celebrate the birth of a healthy child with a joy that is fierce and protective, and they mourn the loss of a mother or an infant with a shared grief that lightens the individual burden. When a woman is sick or in labor, it is her neighbors who will come to tend her fire, mind her children, and offer what little comfort they can. This web of mutual support is the invisible architecture that holds their world together. Music and storytelling, the primary forms of entertainment, are woven into the fabric of their lives. In the evenings, as she spins wool by the flickering firelight, Elspeth's father might tell a story, a local legend, a saint's life, or a garbled version of a heroic epic. These tales, passed down through generations, are more than just a way to pass the time. They are the threads that connect her to her ancestors and to a world larger than her own small village. On feast days, the sound of a fiddle or a pipe can ignite a spontaneous and joyous explosion of dance, a moment where weary bodies forget their aches and move with a wild, uninhibited energy. Singing is a part of daily life, the work songs in the fields and the hymns in the church providing a soundtrack to both labor and prayer. There is a deep satisfaction to be found in her own skill and industry. Though her work is hard and repetitive, it is not without its own artistry. She takes a quiet pride in her ability to spin a fine, even thread, to bake a loaf of bread that rises just right, or to mend a garment so neatly that the patch is almost invisible. These are the small masteries of her domestic world, skills that are essential for her family's survival and a source of her own self-worth. In a life where she has so little control, the competence of her own hands is a small but powerful anchor. The natural world, for all its dangers, is also a source of solace. Elspeth knows the woods and fields around her village with an intimacy born of a lifetime of observation. She knows where to find the best mushrooms after a rain, which herbs can be used to soothe a cough or a fever, and how to read the subtle signs of the changing weather in the sky and the behavior of the animals. This deep connection to the earth is a form of spiritual nourishment, a quiet and personal faith that exists alongside the formal doctrines of the Church. In the silence of the forest or the vastness of the star-filled night sky, she can feel a sense of peace and belonging that transcends the hardships of her daily life. These are the threads of light in Elspeth's world. They do not negate the darkness, the brutality, or the injustice, but they make it bearable. They are the small, resilient beauties that flourish in the cracks of a harsh and unforgiving reality, a testament to the enduring human capacity to find hope and meaning in even the most difficult of circumstances. In a world governed by the harsh dictates of survival, the modern concept of fashion is a form of self-expression and aesthetic pleasures, a distant and alien one. For a woman like Elspeth, clothing is not a choice, but a uniform of her class, a purely functional shield against the elements. Her wardrobe consists of a single outfit, a long woolen tunic, known as a kirtle, worn over a linen shift. She may have a second shift to wear while the other is being washed, a rare, an arduous process involving harsh lye soap and a great deal of scrubbing on the river stones. But the outer tunic is a near-permanent fixture, worn day in and day out, not until it is so threadbare and patched that it threatens to disintegrate. The fabric itself is a testament to her station. It is not the soft, finely woven wool of a noble lady's gown, but a coarse, scratchy material known as homespun. It is spun and woven by the women of her own family. Its lumpy, uneven texture, a world away from the smooth products of a professional weaver. The color is a dull, muddy brown, the natural shade of the sheep's fleece, perhaps darkened with a simple dye made from walnuts or oak galls. Bright colors are a mark of wealth, their creation requiring expensive and exotic materials like madder for red or woad for blue. While to wear a vibrant color would be an act of social presumption, a foolish and unaffordable vanity. The design of her garments is dictated entirely by practicality. The kirtle is loose-fitting, allowing for the full range of motion required for fieldwork. It is long, reaching her ankles to provide warmth and a semblance of modesty. There are no buttons, which are expensive and difficult to make. The tunic is simply pulled on over the head and perhaps cinched at the waist with a leather belt or a length of rope. This is the unchanging uniform of a peasant woman, a style that has remained fundamentally the same for centuries. Yet, even in this world of enforced drabness, the human desire for adornment finds small, subtle ways to express itself. Elspeth might take a moment to braid her hair, a simple act of personal care that costs nothing. On a feast day, she might weave a few wildflowers into her braid, a fleeting and beautiful splash of color against the dull backdrop of her daily life. These small gestures are the entirety of her fashion world, quiet and personal statements of individuality in a life that demands conformity. This stark reality stands in dramatic contrast to the world of the noblewoman. Elspeth has caught glimpses of the lady of the manor on the rare occasions she has ridden through the village. The lady seems like a being from another world, a creature of silk, velvet, and fur. Her gowns are a riot of color-deep crimsons, rich blues, and vibrant greens. They are tailored to fit her form, their long, flowing sleeves and intricate embroidery, a declaration of a life lived free from physical labor. She wears a fantastical headdress, a towering cone, or a delicate jeweled net. That would be laughably impractical for any woman who had to bend or work. The cost of a single one of the Lady-esque gowns would be enough to feed Elspeth's entire village for a year. This is not just a difference in wealth. It is a difference in species. The noblewoman's fashion is designed to be impractical, its very uselessness a symbol of her high status. Her long sleeves trail on the ground, her pointed shoes make it difficult to walk, and her elaborate headdresses require a careful, almost processional posture. Her clothing is a performance, a constant visual reinforcement of her place at the top of the social hierarchy. The concept of beauty itself is shaped by these class divisions. The ideal noblewoman is pale and delicate, her white skin a sign that she does not labor in the sun. She is slender, her diet rich and varied, a stark contrast to the stocky, muscular build of a peasant woman whose body has been shaped by a lifetime of physical toil and a diet of coarse grains. Elspeth, with her sun-darkened skin and calloused hands, is the antithesis of this aristocratic ideal. She is not considered beautiful in the way a noble lady is. She is functional, a sturdy and reliable worker. Her physical attributes valued for their utility rather than their aesthetic appeal. There is a deep and tragic irony in this. The very labor that sustains the lord and lady in their castle, that produces the wealth that allows for their extravagant fashions. It's what marks the peasant woman as plain and undesirable in the eyes of the elite. Her strength is her defining feature, yet it is also the mark of her lowly status. Her life is a constant lived reality, while the noble woman's is a carefully constructed and costly illusion. But for Elspeth, these are not thoughts of social injustice. They are simply the unquestioned facts of her world, as immutable as the sky and the soil. The lady's beauty is a distant, almost mythical thing, like the stories of angels and saints the priest tells in church. It has no more relevance to her own life than the turning of the planets. Her world is one of practical concerns, of mending a tear in her tunic, of finding enough firewood for the night, of praying that the coming winter will not be too harsh. Fashion, beauty, and self-expression are luxuries she cannot afford, dreams that belong to another, unimaginable world. In the brutal landscape of medieval Europe, life is cheap, and violence is a constant, simmering presence. For men, this violence often takes the form of open conflict, battlefield skirmish, a drunken tavern brawl, a feudal dispute settled with fists or blades. But for a woman like Elspeth, the threat is more pervasive, more intimate, and often inescapable. It is woven into the very fabric of her domestic life, and it hangs over her world in the form of raids, banditry, and the casual cruelty of men who hold all the power. The most immediate and sanctioned form of violence is the one she is taught to accept as a natural part of marriage, the right of a husband to discipline his wife. The church and the law are in complete agreement on this matter. A woman is her husband's responsibility, and he is granted the authority to correct her with physical force. This is not seen as abuse, but as a necessary tool for maintaining household order and ensuring a wife's obedience. Elspeth has seen the evidence of this right her entire life. She has seen women flinch when their husbands raise their voices, has seen the artful way they try to hide a bruise with a scarf, or a shift in posture. She knows the stories whispered between women at the well of beatings delivered for a burnt meal, for a sharp tongue, or for no reason at all, simply an outlet. There is no recourse, no one to appeal to. To complain would be to publicly shame her husband, an act of defiance that would likely only result in a more severe punishment. The community, and even her own family, would see it as her failing, a sign that she was a disobedient or difficult wife who had brought the violence upon herself. Her duty is to endure, to be patient and silent in her suffering, a reflection of the Christian martyrs she hears about in church. This domestic tyranny is the quiet, foundational violence of her world, a constant low-level terror that is simply an accepted condition of being a wife. But there are other, more dramatic threats that loom beyond the walls of her hut. The medieval world is a patchwork of competing lordships, a landscape where feuds and petty wars are a constant occurrence. When her lord decides to go to war with a neighboring baron, it is the peasants who pay the highest price. The men are conscripted to fight, leaving the women to manage the fields and the households alone. And when the tide of war washes over their village, the women are the most vulnerable. An invading army, whether it is a rival lord's retinue or a band of foreign mercenaries, sees peasant women not as non-combatants, but as spoils of war. Rape is a common and expected tactic of military conquest, a tool of terror and humiliation used to demoralize and dominate a defeated population. Elspeth has heard harrowing tales from travelers of villages that have been raided, their homes burned, their livestock stolen, and their women subjected to unspeakable horrors. This is a fear that lives in the back of every woman's mind, a nameless dread that surfaces whenever a stranger on horseback is seen on the horizon. The Lord's protection, the very basis of the feudal contract, is a fragile and often distant thing. His castle may be strong, but his men cannot be everywhere at once, and a small, isolated village like Elspeth's is a soft and tempting target. Even in times of relative peace, the roads and forests are not safe. Bands of desperate outlaws, deserters, or peasants who have fled their land roam the countryside, surviving through robbery and violence. A woman who travels alone, even the short distance to the next village or to the market town, is taking a terrible risk. She is seen as easy prey, her body and the few meager possessions she carries available for the taking. For this reason, women rarely travel far from their homes, their world circumscribed by a radius of fear. Their lives are intensely local, their horizons limited not just by a lack of opportunity, but by the very real threat of violence that lurks in the wider world. The legal system, which offers her so little protection in her own home, is utterly indifferent to her suffering at the hands of strangers. The rape of a peasant woman is considered a crime not against her, but against her husband or father, a property crime, a theft of his chattel. The penalty is often a simple fine, paid not to the victim, but to the man who owns her. A woman's testimony is rarely given weight in court, especially if it is her word against a man's. And so, most acts of violence against women go unreported and unpunished, absorbed into the silent, unwritten history of their suffering. This is the world that Elspeth must navigate, a world where her safety is not a right but a matter of luck. A fragile thing dependent on the goodwill of the men around her and the chance avoidance of the casual brutality that is a constant feature of the medieval landscape. In a world where life is a constant battle against hunger, disease, and violence, reaching what we would consider middle age is a rare achievement, and old age is a near miracle. For a woman like Elspeth, the concept of a peaceful retirement, of golden years spent in quiet reflection, is an unimaginable fantasy. To grow old in the medieval world is not to earn a well-deserved rest, but to enter the final and perhaps most brutal stage of a life defined by hardship. It is to become a burden, a mouth to feed that can no longer contribute its share of labor. And in the darkest corners of the communal mind, an object of suspicion and fear. The physical decline that accompanies aging is accelerated and magnified by a lifetime of toil and deprivation. By the time a woman reaches the age of 40, if she has been fortunate enough to survive the repeated perils of childbirth and the constant threat of infection, her body is often a wreck. Her back is permanently stooped from a lifetime of bending in the fields and hunching over a spinning wheel. Her hands are gnarled and twisted with arthritis, her joints swollen and painful from decades of repetitive labor. Most of her teeth are gone, victims of decay, and a diet of coarse, gritty food. Her vision is likely failing, the world dissolving into a blur that makes fine work like sewing impossible. She is a creature of chronic pain, her days and nights a relentless cycle of aches and stiffness that there is no remedy for, save for a prayer or perhaps a bitter herbal tea. This physical decay is not a gentle, gradual process. It is a rapid and merciless collapse. The inevitable result of a body that has been pushed far beyond its limits for its entire existence. As her ability to work diminishes, her value in the eyes of her family and community plummets. In a world where every hand is needed for survival, an elderly woman who can no longer perform her share of the labor is a drain on the household's meager resources. This is the great and terrible fear that haunts the latter years of a woman's life, the fear of becoming useless. Her status within her own family shifts dramatically. The deference and respect she may have earned as a mother and the manager of the household fade, replaced by a grudging sense of obligation and sometimes outright resentment. She is dependent on the charity of her children, a position of profound vulnerability in a world with no social safety net. If her children are kind and dutiful, she may be cared for with a degree of compassion. But if they are struggling to feed their own families, her presence can become a source of tension and conflict. For a woman who outlives her husband, the situation is even more precarious. As a widow, she may have a brief period of legal and economic autonomy, controlling her husband's land as her dower. But this independence is a double-edged sword. A widow with property is a tempting target for unscrupulous relatives or neighbors, who may try to cheat her out of her land, while she is also under immense pressure to remarry, to once again place herself under the protection of a man. If she has no sons to defend her interests, she is in a position of extreme vulnerability. The communal support system that sustains younger families often has little to offer an elderly woman living alone. It is in this stage of life that the darkest and most irrational fears of the medieval mind can come to the surface. An old woman, living on the margins of the village, is an object of suspicion. Her physical appearance, her wrinkled skin, her stooped posture, her rheumy eyes is seen as a sign of her inner state. She is strange, different, and therefore potentially dangerous. Her knowledge of herbs and folk remedies, once a valuable resource for the community, can now be reinterpreted as evidence of a more sinister craft. If a cow falls sick, if a child develops a fever, if a crop fails, the village's fear and anxiety will seek a target, and the isolated, vulnerable old woman is the most likely candidate. This is the fertile ground from which the horror of the witch hunts will grow in the later medieval and early modern periods. The stereotype of the witch as an old, ugly crone is born from this deep-seated social anxiety about elderly women who live outside the direct control of men. Elspeth sees the beginnings of this in her own village. There is an old widow named Agnes who lives in a small hut at the edge of the woods. The children are afraid of her, whispering that she can curdle milk with a glance or cause storms with her muttered curses. The adults treat her with a mixture of pity and fear, leaving a small offering of bread at her door on feast days, an act that is as much an attempt to ward off potential malevolence as it is an act of charity. Elspeth watches Agnes, her own future reflected in the old woman's lonely and precarious existence. She knows that if she is one of the lucky few to survive into old age, a similar fate of isolation, suspicion, and a slow, painful decline may await her. This is the final, cruel irony of a medieval woman's life. To survive the immense challenges of her youth and middle age is to face a new and more insidious set of dangers in her final years of time. When she is at her most vulnerable and has the fewest resources to defend herself, let us draw the threads of Elspeth's life together, to see not just the daily struggles, but the entire arc of a life that is both tragically short and brutally complete. Her story, from the cradle to an early grave, is the story of millions of women whose existence was a testament to the quiet, uncelebrated art of endurance. She is born, not in a clean, safe room, but on a dirty straw mattress on the floor of her family's hut. The first sounds she hears are not gentle coos, but the lowing of the family goat and the crackle of a smoky fire. Her first bath is in a wooden bucket of cold, likely contaminated water. From her very first breath, she is immersed in a world of filth and peril. Her survival through infancy is a matter of sheer luck, a victory against the overwhelming odds of disease and malnutrition. Many of her siblings, born before and after her, will not be so fortunate. Their brief lives will be commemorated by small, rough-hewn wooden crosses in the churchyard, constant silent reminder of life's fragility. Her childhood is not a time of play and learning, but an apprenticeship in labor. As soon as she can walk, she is given tasks, chasing chickens, gathering firewood, pulling weeds. Her hands, which should be busy with toys, are instead hardened and calloused by work. She learns the geography of her world through the lens of toil, the stony part of the field to be avoided. The patch of woods where the best firewood can be found, the path to the well worn deep by the feet of generations of women before her. She does not learn to read or write. The world of letters is as remote and mysterious as the heavens. Her education is in the practical, brutal necessities of survival. She learns to be silent, to be obedient, and to work until her body aches with a weariness that seems to seep into her very bones. She watches her mother and learns what it is to be a woman, to serve, to suffer, and to expect nothing more. Her transition to adulthood comes abruptly with marriage, an event in which she is a passive participant, a piece of property exchanged between two men. Her wedding is not a celebration of love, but the formalization of a contract. She leaves her family, her village, the only world she has ever known, and becomes a stranger in a new household. Subject to the authority of a husband she barely knows, her identity is erased, subsumed into his. She is no longer Elspeth, daughter of John. Her legal and social existence is entirely dependent on him. Her life becomes a relentless cycle of pregnancy and childbirth, each one a terrifying gamble with death. She labors in fear and agony, attended by a midwife whose only tools are superstition and a comforting hand. She brings children into a world that will offer them little more than the same life of toil she has known. She watches many of them sicken and die, her heart breaking with a grief that has no name and no outlet. A sorrow so common, it is simply an accepted part of a mother's life. Between pregnancies, her labor in the home and the fields is unending. She rises before the sun and works until long after it is set. Her body a machine fueled by a meager diet of bread and pottage. She fights a constant losing battle against the filth that surrounds her, a battle that saps her strength and exposes her and her children to constant illness. She endures the casual brutality of her husband's discipline, the suffocating scrutiny of the community, and the damning doctrines of a church that tells her she is inherently sinful and deserving of her suffering. Her small moments of joy, a good harvest, a healthy child, a village feast star, rare islands, and a vast ocean of hardship. She finds solace, not in comfort or leisure for these things, do not exist but in the solidarity of other women, in the beauty of the changing seasons, and in a simple, desperate faith that promises a reward in the next life for the suffering she endures in this one. And then, her life ends. It does not end in peaceful old age, surrounded by loving family. It ends abruptly, when she is perhaps 25 or 30. The agent of her death is mundane and unremarkable. It might be an infection after her 5th childbirth, a fever that rages for days until her body can fight no more. It might be dysentery from a drink of tainted water. It might be the plague, sweeping through the village like a dark wind, leaving a trail of death in its wake. Or it might simply be exhaustion, her body finally giving out after a lifetime of being pushed beyond its limits. Her death is a small, quiet event. The priest will say a few words, her family will mourn, and she will be buried in a simple shroud in the churchyard. Within a year, her husband will remarry, for a man with small children cannot manage without a wife. Her name will be forgotten by all but her own children, and her story, the story of her silent, brutal, and resilient life, will vanish, absorbed into the great, unwritten history of the medieval poor. This is the grim reality for Elspeth, and for the countless women she represents. Her life is not a romance or a heroic tale. It is a stark and brutal testament to survival in a world that was fundamentally and systemically built upon her silence and her suffering. And so we leave Elspeth in her unmarked grave, her brief, brutal life, a single silent note in the vast, unwritten symphony of female suffering that underpins the medieval world. To understand the grim reality of her existence is to look unflinchingly at the foundations upon which the grand cathedrals, epic poems, and the chivalric codes of the age were built. Her life was not an anomaly. It was the norm. Her suffering was not incidental. It was structural, a necessary component of a world order that functioned by extracting her labor, controlling her body, and silencing her voice. Let us pull back for a final sweeping view of this landscape, to see how the individual threads of her story are woven into the larger, darker tapestry of medieval womanhood. We have seen how her identity was legally erased, her existence a mere appendage to that of her father or husband. She was a vessel, a piece of property, her worth measured in dowries and her ability to produce male heirs. She had no claim to the land she worked, no right to the children she bore, and no voice in the laws that governed her. This legal nullity was the cage that confined her, a reality so absolute and all-encompassing that to even question it would be like questioning the existence of the sun. We have witnessed the relentless physical toil that defined her days. From the back-breaking labor of the fields to the endless repetitive tasks of the household. Her body was a tool, its strength and endurance commodities to be used until they were spent. There was no separation between work and life, no concept of rest or leisure. Her waking hours were a blur of motion, a constant grinding effort to hold back the tide of entropy, to keep the fire lit, the pot full, and the thin fabric of her family's survival from tearing completely. This was a physical brutality that shaped her very bones, stooping her back and gnarling her hands, aging her far beyond her years. We have confronted the terror of childbirth, the most dangerous passage in a woman's life, a recurring ordeal that she faced with a courage born of utter necessity. In a world without medical understanding, every birth was a gamble with death, a roll of the dice against infection and hemorrhage. She was a soldier in a war of biology, her victories marked by the cries of a newborn. her defeats by the silent grief of her family and another small grave in the churchyard. We have felt the constant low-level misery of poor health, the gnawing of a rotten tooth, ache of a strained back, the ever-present threat of a fever that could snuff out a life in a matter of days. Her world was a mire of filth, her body a battleground for pathogens she could not see or understand. Medicine was a realm of superstition and brutal, ineffective treatments. An illness was a sign not of biological misfortune, but of a spiritual failing. We have seen how the church, the supposed source of comfort and salvation, was also a powerful instrument of her oppression. It provided the divine justification for her subservient status, teaching her that she was inherently sinful, the weak-willed daughter of Eve, whose suffering was a just and holy penance. It offered her the impossible ideal of the Virgin Mary, a model of purity and submission that stood in constant, silent judgment over her own messy, earthbound reality. Its rules governed the most intimate aspects of her life, its calendar of fasts, adding the torment of holy hunger to her already deprived existence. We have understood the suffocating nature of her community, a world without privacy, where every action was judged and every deviation from the norm was met with suspicion. Her reputation was a fragile and precious thing, easily destroyed by a malicious word or an unsubstantiated rumor. And we have seen the dark undercurrent of violence that ran through her life, from the legally sanctioned discipline of her husband to the ever-present threat of rape and raid in a lawless and brutal world. Her safety was a fragile illusion, her body a vulnerable territory in a landscape dominated by male aggression. To look at this totality of experience is to be confronted with a reality so grim that it is tempting to despair. It is to see a life seemingly devoid of hope, of beauty, of agency. And yet this is not the full story. For to focus only on the brutality is to miss the most remarkable part of Elspeth's tale, her resilience. She was not merely a passive victim of her circumstances. Within the impossibly narrow confines of her world, she carved out a life of meaning and dignity. She found joy in the turning of the seasons, solace in the solidarity of other women, and a fierce, protective love for the children she brought into the world. She was a repository of practical knowledge, her hands skilled in the arts of healing, cooking, and crafting. She was a storyteller, a singer of songs, a keeper of the communal memory. She was the silent, unacknowledged center of her family and her village, the invisible force that ensured the continuity of life itself. Her heroism was not the celebrated heroism of the knight on the battlefield, but the quiet, daily heroism of survival. It was the courage to rise before dawn to face another day of back-breaking labor, to bring a child into a world of suffering and love it with all her heart, to find beauty in a wildflower growing by the side of a muddy track, to endure the unendurable with a strength that was never named and never praised. This is the grim, and ultimately the profound reality of being a woman in the Middle Ages. Her life was one of almost unimaginable hardship, a story written in sweat, in blood, and in silence. But it was also a story of a strength so deep and so enduring that it has been passed down through the generations, a silent inheritance that flows in the veins of her descendants today. To remember her is to honor the true, unwritten history of the medieval world. A history not of kings and castles, but of the quiet, indomitable spirit of the women who held it all together. And so our journey through the shadows of the medieval world comes to a quiet end. We leave Elspeth, and the countless women she represents, to their silent rest in the soil of a forgotten time. Their lives etched not in stone or scripture, but in the invisible annals of human endurance, fade back into the mist of history. As the candlelight of our story flickers and dies, let the profound quiet of their world settle around you. Theirs was a reality of immense hardship, a life lived under the heavy cloak of submission, toil, and pain. Yet it was a life nonetheless. It was a life that found moments of grace in the rising sun. A brief warmth on a cold morning, the shared laughter with a sister by the riverbank. It's the fierce protective love for a child held close against the darkness. The grand narrative of history, with its kings, battles, and cathedrals, was built upon the foundation of their silent, unyielding strength. They were the roots of the great tree, buried in the dark earth, unseen and unpraised, yet providing the nourishment for all that grew towards the sun. As you drift now towards the gentle shores of sleep, let their story be not a source of sorrow, but a deep, quiet reminder of the resilience that lies within us all. Their struggles have ended, their pain has passed, and what remains is a legacy of survival, a testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit in the face of overwhelming darkness. Let the images fade now. The smoky hut, the muddy fields, the stoic, tired faces. Let them all dissolve into the peaceful quiet of your rest. Sleep well, and dream of a world where their silent strength has finally found its voice.